Welcome to the Mental Mastery Breakfast for Leaders. Today I'm going to talk about Gerald. When I worked with Gerald, he was 39 years old, and he was a relatively recently appointed CEO of a local organization. The CEO had a board that he had to report to, and they chose Gerald to take over this role because he was a really strong strategic person in working out strategies, very sharp analytical thinker, and he had also an abundant level of energy that they felt was really helpful to take this organization to the next level. Besides, he was a good deal maker, and so that was another benefit that he had why they chose him to become the CEO. At the same time, there were some warning signs coming up fairly quickly. Number one, when Gerald gave a presentation to the board, for example, about a potential M&A or any other strategic initiative that he needed to get approval for, some board members called these presentations depressing. And they were wondering if he needs some presentation skills training or coaching. Also, he seemed to be all over the place. Yes, he worked really hard, but they felt he was lacking focus. He was lacking to really do the right things, focus his main energy on some key elements. And that was also concerning them, that they believed if he keeps operating this way, they may not achieve the results they want. So coaching was discussed, and I still remember when the HR director called me and asked, Charlie, do you do presentations coaching? I said, well, yes, I can do that. Can you tell me a bit more what this is about? And she said, well, we have this CEO who is great in many ways, but his presentations were described as depressing. And so I asked the lady, have you considered presentations training? That's a lot faster and probably cheaper than having a coach. And she said, yeah, we did that already. It didn't help much. So I agreed with her that we would have a session first where we would do a deeper assessment. She also shared with me the other challenge about focus. And so we did a psychometric assessment, Harrison, and I said, let him prepare or share a presentation that he would give to the board. Give it to me, take some confidential stuff out so that I get a better sense of what's going on. And so we did exactly that. And two things I noticed. Number one, again, considering the mental mastery model, his self-esteem was totally out of balance, meaning his self-acceptance was super low, really, really very low, almost the lowest it could be. And his self-improvement was super high, almost the highest it could be. I mean, I've seen imbalances between these two, self-acceptance and self-improvement, but I haven't often seen such extreme imbalance. Secondly, also quite a strong imbalance. His self-motivation was super high. I guess it was a total 10 out of 10, but his stress management was very poor. It was only about 3 out of 10, something like that. And that's quite a red flag and could maybe explain some of the things. But I thought, okay, let me hold my judgment what that could mean before I get better sense. I need to talk to him, and also I need to let him do this presentation. Maybe I get a better view. So he gave the presentation, which was scheduled to last for about 20 minutes. And after about 10 minutes, I said to him, thank you, you can stop. I guess I got the picture. He was a little bit surprised that I stopped him even before the 20 minutes were up. And I said to him, can I ask you, what was your role before you became the CEO? And he said, well, I was the CFO. I said, okay. So what was your mission as a CFO? And he said, well, my mission was to protect the company from financial risks and give guidance to the CEO how to make the right decisions based on financial insights. And this answer came really quickly, which was great. At the same time, I asked him, so what's your mission now? Because the presentation was actually about a possible merger and acquisition that he worked out and presented to the board. And so I asked him, so what's your mission now as a CEO? And it was interesting that he didn't answer that question equally quickly as he did for the CFO. In fact, he needed a few seconds to think it through. And then he said, well, I guess it's to help the organization grow. I said, okay. And of course, grow profitably. Sure. And he added to build more shareholder value. Okay, makes all sense. And then I said, if you look at the presentation that you just gave me, 10 minutes, which mission were you pursuing? And it was very obvious. He was pursuing the mission of a CFO. And I said, so you see, your presentation, actually the way you presented was not that bad. We can still do some fine-tuning, not a problem, but that's not why the board thought your presentation is depressing. It's actually the content. You focus 80-90% on all the risks and all the things that could go wrong, and about 10 to 20% on the opportunity. And then he said to me, well, I've been to such presentations before. When the previous CEO gave a presentation, he was actually, in my opinion, he was not very honest, because he painted such a beautiful picture of such. If he would have done the same presentation, he would have do it the other way around, 80-90% of all the benefits and beauty, and 10 to 20% on the risk. And that's not honest. And I said to him, well, what you presented, is that honest? Is that really true, that the chances of any success is only 10-20%? And he looked at me a bit shocked that I dared to say that to him. And I said to him, look, I have no stakes in this. You can present whatever you want, and it's ultimately your choice. At the same time, think about what the board expects. What does the board really expect? What's your mission in this organization? Your mission has changed. As a CFO, maybe it's okay to present like this, but as a CEO, apparently it's not. And as we kept talking about that, something else came up. He actually said to me, you know, I worry every night. I said, what do you mean, every night? He said, I wake up every night around 2-3 a.m., and then I worry for about 2-3 hours about, did I miss something? Do we do something that's maybe ultimately not safe? And so forth. And so, by the way, in the assessment, in the Harrison assessment, we saw that his risk-taking score was very low. For a CEO, it's really low. His analyzing pitfalls score was off the charts almost, super high. So he was super cautious. And because now he had the full responsibility for the organization, he worried even more. And it became so bad that he couldn't sleep at night. So, and you see, that becomes it becomes essentially a vicious circle. Because if you can't sleep well at night because you worry, guess what? You are at higher risk that you miss something, that you make a mistake because you didn't sleep well. And then you worry about that and you cannot sleep at night, and it becomes a circle, right? And so we did the 3-step approach to enhancing the self-esteem, to increase his self-acceptance. And I have to say, this was probably one of the most amazing things in my over 20 years of coaching career. While this approach usually works really well with almost every coachee that I've ever used it with, in his case, it worked even better. Eventually, he realized that the best he can do is the best he can do. he cannot get better than the best. It's just not possible. And so at any time and any day when he does what he does, he can only put in his best effort, make the best judgments, do the best what he can. And maybe it turns out into something good. Hopefully it will, but sometimes it may not. And to worry all the time what could go wrong is not helpful, especially for things he has already done, because you can't really change the past. I think that's very obvious. And so he called me actually 3 days later. 3 days later, after we did this exercise with the 3 steps, he called me and said, Charlie, last night I didn't wake up anymore. It's crazy. And I said, wow, that sounds amazing. What exactly happened? And he said, after our last session 3 days ago, that night I woke up and I went into the same loop for about half an hour. Oh God, what may I have missed? And it's so terrible. And if it goes wrong and whatever, right? All these negative thoughts came up again, and he stayed awake for about half an hour until he realized that, oh, I'm again in the same loop. And then he said to himself, well, I can just put in my best effort, and that's all I can do, and the outcome will be the outcome. And I cannot do more than my best. It's just not possible. Logically impossible. So if it doesn't turn out well, then I have to deal it when it happens. But I can just put in my best effort, and that's what I'm going to do. And after he told himself that a few times, he actually fell back asleep less than an hour into his awakening. The next night, it took about 5 minutes that he realized he's again in the loop. He kind of repeated that same mantra a couple of times, and within a total of 15 minutes, he went back to sleep. And the third night, he didn't even wake up anymore. And that was quite amazing. The other thing that we worked on is really about his stress. Remember, his stress management was really poor. And the mental mastery concept, if you remember, is about how we think about things. And in terms of stress, is how do we think about the work, the workload, the pressure, all these kind of things that could trigger the emotion of stress. And he learned that if he changes the way he thinks about these things, then he changes actually how he feels about these things, and the stress will become much less. And that was another area that we worked on, that he could really improve quite significantly within relatively short time. The whole coaching lasted only 4 or 5 months, but we made very significant progress. Now, I have to say, he was very receptive to these things, and I found this approach works particularly well with people who are very analytical, and he was super analytical. And the good news is the board also gave positive feedback in the next presentation that he had to give, that his presentation was much more engaging, much more balanced, and it was less hoo-ha like his predecessor. It was still something he could buy into, but it was much more realistic and real, and as a result, it was much better received. In terms of his ability to focus, we did some work on that as well, but that was less related to the mental mastery concept. Maybe to some extent, the self-esteem helps also to keep more focused, to be less scattered, but that was almost a separate topic. So if you found this episode of Mental Mastery Breakfast for Leaders useful, please don't forget to subscribe. Hit the subscribe button, leave your comments, hit the like button, and I see you again in our next Mental Mastery Breakfast for Leaders.